So we got some really interesting news yesterday. Western Electric is going to start making commonly available guitar amp tubes right here in the US. So I did a video about the tube shortage recently, and there are a lot of videos on YouTube about that. I think probably everybody's familiar with that situation by now. Mr. Mann posted in my comment section to that video, brought it to my attention that the Western Electric Company, who had been making a high-end audiophile tube called the 300B for some time, I think that's the only tube they were making, but they were considering making commonly available guitar tubes in light of the current situation with tube shortages. They had a short survey posted on their website. If you went there, a pop-up would come up and they'd ask some questions. And anyway, apparently they got an overwhelming response to that from guitar amplifier manufacturers and from individuals. So we found out yesterday that they do intend to start building some commonly available guitar amplifier tubes. This is from an article posted on guitar.com, and this was published yesterday. This is an interview with Western Electric regarding the expansion of their tube manufacturing facility for some of the common guitar amp tubes like 12AX7s. Anyway, there's a history. You can read the history. There's a short wiki page, and also at the Western Electric website they have a history of the company. But the current company, the group that's building tubes there, and they actually have only built one tube in that factory, I think, the 300B, which is a quite expensive tube, and it's just used in audiophile equipment. It's not something that's been used in guitar amplifiers. But they do have a factory for building tubes, and the old Western Electric company built tubes anyway. They built tubes and telephones and some other things. So a couple of concerns when people were discussing this in some of the forums and some of the YouTube comments to other pages that I've read, was cost. This 300B is quite expensive, and they talk about that. They deal with that a little bit in this interview. In this question here, the Western Electric 300B sits at a much higher price point than its equivalent made in Russia or China. And the response was that labor rates, of course, are more expensive here. They say that the materials they use are higher quality, and the price will be higher. But they have no intention to take advantage and charge an absurd premium for the tube. So probably they will be more expensive than the tubes that are available from Russia and Slovakia and China that we've been able to get. So we'll see. Hopefully they can get these in at a reasonable price. There's definitely a market for a high-end American-made tube. People pay big money for new old stock tubes. There are a lot of expensive hand-wired amplifiers from the boutique manufacturers, and even some of the companies like Fender with their custom hand-wired line. They could clearly put more expensive American tubes in these amps, and people would be willing to pay a premium for that, I think. So let's see how much more they're going to cost. This was an interesting question they were asked too. If Western Electric's initial expansion is successful, would you consider opening plants outside the U.S. in order to remain competitive? And they state that Western Electric products have always been made in the USA, and so they'll continue to make them here. So we'll see. That's kind of interesting. Again, that is part of the allure of what the Western Electric is doing, is actually having a high-quality American-made tube. Again, clearly there's a market for that. I've was reading some comments on one of the forums. There was some concern that if the Russian tubes come back online in full force, and maybe even the Shuguang factory in China gets back up in production, would that create a surplus of tubes and makes something like what Western Electric is trying to do kind of obsolete because of the cost? At least would it relegate it to sort of a niche market. I don't know. We know that there are millions of new guitar players that have taken up the instrument since COVID, and the ones that already played have been buying equipment like crazy. Will that continue? Who knows? I mean, to some extent it should continue. There's definitely a larger market of people to sell equipment to, and we know how popular tube amplifiers are. I did a video on that, and so yeah, I think maybe there's a market for, maybe there's enough room for all these manufacturers to make tubes at different price points. I thought this question was really interesting too. Does the process present any environmental challenges that weren't a concern in the 1930s? That's always a topic of discussion when people talk about manufacturing things in the U.S. Compared to other countries that have more stringent environmental regulations. And the question goes on to say, you mentioned that you've made key updates to machinery to ensure clean and safe assembly. Would these updates present challenges when tooling up for a wider range of tubes? And they state no. Every material we use is considered safe and green. Western Electric strives to meet all OSHA and EPA standards and does not use any banned substances. We sell and ship vacuum tubes every day. And I thought this last sentence was kind of interesting. We hope this is enough to demystify any old wives' tales about tube manufacturing hazards. So, you know, they're set up now to build tubes. They state in this article that some of the things they already have that they would need, the sockets and things, or at least the materials to build these commonly available tubes. Compared to what they're building now, this is another interesting question too, and the more harmonic distortion, if that was acceptable, but part of the response that was kind of interesting. That being said, yes, manufacturing a dual triode like the 12AX7 is significantly easier and less labor intensive than a 300B. So some of these commonly available guitar amplifier tubes will be easier and less expensive for them to build anyway, they're stating. So that's good news. They were asked the question, is it fair to say that the guitar amplifier market is less niche than the premium hi-fi market? Would an expansion into even higher end guitar amplifier tubes require a significant increase in production numbers? And you know, they state that after the overwhelming response from our little announcement, we know for a fact that the guitar amp crowd is massive. People are ready for higher quality American made tubes. We're ready to meet that demand and increase production capacity accordingly. We have the infrastructure in place to do so. So yeah, compared to a company just trying to start from scratch building tubes, Western Electric clearly has an advantage and a leg up, and they're really, it sounds like, ready to ramp up production and start selling these things, or start building them and selling them. So we'll see. How long will it take them to get these into production and out to market? It'll be interesting to watch. I've got my fingers crossed and remain optimistic. Can they build tubes here in sufficient numbers and at a competitive price to compete in some way with what we're able to get from JJ and maybe Electro Harmonix, maybe the Chinese Shuguang factory again? We'll see. I do think there's a market for higher end American made tubes. Many people prefer the new old stock tubes that were made in the US or in Europe in the 1950s and 60s, and people pay a premium for those tubes. They think they last longer, they think they sound better, and certainly a lot of the amplifier manufacturers could use that as a selling point on amplifiers that they're building, especially some of the higher end manufacturers. So yeah, we'll see. Anyway, thanks and see you next time.